events. There's a sustainable interest to the forum from the international community. In 2023, it brought together more than 17,000 people from 130 countries. In 2024, more than 21,800 participants from 139 countries. Following the latest forum, 1,073 agreements were signed. This shows a high level of confidence and business activity. This forum has been taking place since 2006 under the auspices of the President of the Russian Federation. It is organized by the Roscongress Foundation with the support of the relevant ministries. It is absolutely clear that this forum is an important tool of constructive international interaction aimed at development of multipolar world, strengthening economic stability, and searching for balanced solutions amid modern challenges. Leadership and representatives of the Foreign Ministry will participate in relevant sessions and panel discussions of the forum on topics to do with global economy and trade, development of integration processes, regional cooperation, challenges in energy, food, technological development. Special attention will be given to BRICS and CO forums, as well as a number of country-wise business dialogues. As usual, the Department of Information and Print will actively participate and is going to hold 2 panel discussions. The emergence of a just and sustainable world order through strengthening common values of the countries of the global majority and countering fakes. I invite all of you to participate. Our next briefing will take place on the sidelines on the forum. Let's talk about the relevant agenda about the situation around Ukraine. We talked a lot of things, but there are more follow-up questions about it. After the second round of direct Russia-Ukraine negotiations in Istanbul on June the 2nd, Russia immediately started to implement the agreements reached there. On June 6th, a list of 640 wounded and severely ill soldiers, as well as those under 25 years old, subject to exchange, was sent to Kiev. On June the 9th, the first part of the young soldiers was returned to us. The second stage of the exchange took place yesterday on June the 10th, and I hope that they're happy to be at home, that the country does everything it can to take them out of the end. I think that you saw their commentaries. Within the repatriation of 6,000 bodies of dead soldiers, on June 7th, Russia took the first party of 1,212 bodies to the border. However, the Kiev regime shocked everyone and refused to receive them. Russia is fully prepared to fulfill the agreements reached in Istanbul. We expect the same approach from the Ukrainian side, but it is not the first and the only, but a very vivid sign of the terrible essence of the Kiev regime. To confirm that its terrorist essence, the Kiev regime continued to launch strikes against civilians and civil infrastructure of the Russian regions. For some reason, they continue to call people living there theirs. In the Belgrade region, on June the 2nd, in the village of Khotmyshsk, following a an explosive being dropped from a drone. One man was wounded in the village of Dobre. A drone attacked a van. Two men were wounded. On June the 3rd, 4 civilians were wounded. On June 5th through 7th in Belgrade and other villages, following drone attacks, 13 civilians were wounded. An 18-year-old boy was wounded in Belgrade on June 9th. In the Kursk regions, on June the 2nd, the village of Skorodne saw targeted strikes against a school and a cultural facility. On June the 3rd, a Ukrainian drone attacked the village of Karavanovka, leaving a 31-year-old man killed. In the city of Rilsk, a 66-year-old woman was wounded. On June 6th through 7th, in the villages of Martinovka and Karish, following a drone attacks, 5 civilians were wounded, including a 65-year-old man. On June 8th, the enemy attacked electric substation Rilsk. The enemy drone also attacked the Cathedral of the Domitian there. On June 9th, the Ukrainian army targeted a cultural facility in the village of Prigorodnia, Slobodka. According to the head of the Perechinska village council, after the occupation in the village of Ruska Prechnya, there were no survivors. After the beginning of the incursion in the Suja region, there were 92 people, mostly elderly. Only 10 could made it out. Until the place was liberated in March 2025, out of 81 people, 48 died, 24 went missing. On June the 3rd, in the DPR, 20 items of munitions were launched. 2 civilians were wounded. In the LPR, the Ukrainian Nazis dropped munitions on people at the shop of the village of Svatovo. 2 civilians were wounded. They also attacked a civilian vehicle. The driver was wounded. In the Zaporozhye region on June the 5th, following an attack, a 77-year-old woman was wounded. In the villages of Aloshki and Proletarka on June 4th and 5th, 3 civilians were wounded. On June the 8th, in Rodansk, the attacks left a 56-year-old man wounded. The Russian courts continue to investigate crimes and to pronounce verdicts. Fighters of the Azov Nation Battalion, it was acknowledged on the territory of Russia. Sniper Ruslan Orlov and field medic Atom Novikov was given 26 and 24 years in prison respectively for killing civilians in the DPR. 4 more Ukrainian fighters were given sentences in prison for armed blocking of the village of Lgovka, the Kursk region. They received 15 years in prison. Grenade launcher operator Sergei Stokaz for shelling civilians in the village of Pogrivki, the Kursk region, received 16 years in prison. 23.5 years in prison was given to militant Danil Ovcharenko. Now about those who sponsor this, who's behind this. On June the 4th, Brussels saw the 28th meeting of the contact group on, as they call themselves, defense facilitation to Ukraine. For the first time, it took place without any kind of presence of the U.S. representatives. It was presided by defense ministers of Germany and Great Britain. And the fact that all those present favor the escalation, is seen in the cynical congratulation to the Kiev regime with the attack on the Russian military air drones. Amid this, Zelensky started his same old story that it is necessary to start as soon as possible to supply them with air defense systems. But those are not investments in the Ukrainian air military and industrial base. However, Zelensky couldn't persuade his sponsors. The allies did not dip into their pockets and preferred to report on their own achievements to finance the terror activities of the Kiev regime. Great Britain wants to allocate 350 million pounds to increase the number of drones being supplied from 10 to 100,000 items. What London has always talked about human rights, but they forgot about it. Since the beginning of the year, London sent 140,000 artillery shells to Kiev. They also plan to allocate 250 million pounds for Interflex program. Germany confirmed that they will allocate 5 billion euros to help Kiev. Defense Minister, the so-called Defense Minister of Ukraine, Maria, boasted about plans of other allies to help to the Zelensky regime. For example, Norway wants to allocate $700 million for drones and $50 million to Trust Foundation of NATO mission to facilitate security and military training on Ukraine. The Netherlands will give 400 million euros for anti-mine ship, boats and sea drones. Sweden will give 440 million euros to procure artillery shells. Canada will give $45 million for drones, EW systems and IT solutions. Belgium wants to annually until 2029 give 1 billion euros, according to Maria, to support Ukraine and to give them an anti-mine ship. Belgium, Italy, Turkey, Sweden, Estonia wanted to participate in the work of the so-called EW coalition established at the previous meeting of the group. The get-together also expressed ideas to align the investments to the defense of Ramstein with the EU 150 billion, I quote, rearmament program. This is the testament to what NATO new infrastructure aims at. They don't care about the life of their own people or to find solutions to the issues that the region and the world faces. They care about using the Kiev regime and Kiev for their own purposes. But what are their purposes? It's a great question. We should address it to them. On June the 4th, France announced finance guarantees worth 1.5 billion euros for defense procurements from national companies. On June 6th, Defense Minister of France said that Renault concern launches drone production in Ukraine.
Lisbon plans to provide in 2025 military assistance to Kiev worth 220 to 225 million euros. It is a testimony to the aggressive intentions of West European Kiev allies and their maniacal aspiration to escalate the conflict at any price. And what about Ukraine itself? Well, we are seeing that forced mobilization is likely to happen soon. The Kiev regime is forced to seek new forms of forced mobilization from February to June this year. About 1.5 million young people had to go through a medical commission. Those who were only partially worth or fitting for the military service. Previously, the Verkhovna Rada is considering a possibility of voluntary mobilization of men elder than 60 people. They are offered to sign a voluntary contract for 1 year and with a test period of 2 months with the possibility to cancel the contract. The Ukrainian Banderovite activist said that Ukraine is now at a stage where not only men but also women and young people from the age of 18 have to be ready for mobilization. Maria Berlinska stressed there was no need to proceed to such actions so far, but the situation might change, so the Ukrainian population, according to her, needs to be ready. On the 9th of June, the Ombudswoman for Education of Ukraine, Nadezhda Leshik, recognized that young people and young school children are going abroad. According to her, in the 10th and 11th grades, a certain number of children are enrolled in the 10th and 11th grades, but only few of them graduate from these classes. She also stressed that it is a result of the statements of authorities about the plans to a possibility for plans of the current Ukrainian authorities to recruit the 18th-year-old this autumn. So the Zelensky regime is ready to sacrifice the young Ukrainians without any second thoughts. And now about the facts how Ukrainian citizens are punished for their dissent. The Kiev regime tries to complicate lives for people for slightest dissent from the doctrines. On the 4th of June, Verkhovna Rada adopted a draft law about criminalization of bypassing economic sanctions. What is so surprising about it? Just look at it. This draft law criminalizes, in particular, unintentional violation of sanctions, not only by those who are subjected to sanctions, but also by third parties. Sanctions include a fine, a large fine of 425,000 up to 2 million hryvnia, imprisonment of up to 10 years, and possible additional punishment in the form of ban to take certain positions and conduct certain activities for a period of up to 15 years and confiscation of property. But once again, those are certain separate facts from different spheres of life, but they point to the need of the special military operation aimed at denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine and elimination of threats emanating from its territory. All the goals of the special military operation will be reached. Now let's talk about the assistance provided by the Western states to the Kiev regime. At times, it's exactly the contrary. What they do on the 29th of May, the Globe and Mail Canadian media published an article under the name, I quote, "Satellite data shed light on Russia's modern-day gulags for Ukrainian children," end of quote. It is not a fake, it is something more. It is a disinformation campaign that has become part of the work of an information outlet. This article describes in a fantasy manner how certain NGOs for Canadian funds reveal in open sources information about allegedly missing Ukrainian children. They monitor social networks of social workers' children, study satellite data, and use artificial intelligence. In a word, they are working for the noble goal of bringing minor Ukrainians to Ukraine. Do they know that we have received a list of those whom Ukrainian regime considers as missing? It is about 300 people. Previously, they were talking about some millions of children. While according to the Canadian media outlet, it has been possible to liberate 129 people and mark or label 36 social facilities in which Ukrainian children are kept. I think Havel would applaud this article. Previously, we were talking about a well-established mechanism to search for children if they are missing, if there are any suspicions. If someone is looking for a child and considers it possible that the child might be in our country, it is sufficient to contact the office of Maria Zakharova, who is Russian ombudswoman for children's rights. And if the child is in Russia, there will be no hindrances to its reunification with the relatives. The Russian authorities will provide assistance, and it has been demonstrated on multiple occasions. For the time being, 101 minors from 81 families got reunited with their relatives living in Ukraine and in other countries, and 22 children from 15 families returned from Ukraine to Russia. On the 2nd of June, during the talks in Istanbul, we received a list of 339 children from the Kiev authorities. Those are children who lost connection to their relatives, and we are studying each and every case. But it was not needed to wait until the direct negotiations. It would have been sufficient to write an email to Maria Zakharova. The Canadian article, well, I have to call it a publication, but in a sense it is simply a fake news. Well, according to the publication, Yun Army is what they call Gulag. According to the pseudo-journalists, Ukrainian children are allegedly forced to assimilation. They are banned from speaking Ukrainian language and allegedly they are forcibly detained. Well, let's look into it. First, participation in the UnArmia movement is a voluntary thing. Have you ever seen children who would be tied, who would be forced to travel somewhere to sing songs, to say poems? Have you seen such children in UnArmia? I haven't, but Canadians know it better. They have seen it from satellites. Secondly, it is only upon permission of a legal representative that a child may join the UnArmia movement. The goal of the movement is multidimensional development of a child's personality and meeting their needs in moral and physical improvement. How are these goals achieved? By means of development among the young people of principles of collectivism based on the principles of justice, equality, unity and responsibility, love for the people, respect and tolerance. It was a quote. Has anyone in Global Mail read the document? No, they have seen the satellites. They know it better. Where have they seen a ban to speak any language, including the Ukrainian language? Where have they seen any references to hatred against Ukrainians or other nationalities or religious groups? There is no word about Ukraine in the documents of UNARMY. The Canadian media outlet who published this terrible article didn't mention that in Ukraine itself, children for many years have been taught to hate the Russians, the Russian language. They are trained to kill Muscovites, to kill them with knives, to glorify Bandera and Shukevich and other Hitler accomplices. In the Ukrainian country, there is a network of children Nazi camps, and the tutors, who are the tutors, fighters of terrorist organizations prohibited in Russia. I'm talking about Azov and the Right Center, who sponsored it. It is sponsored by the state, and the funds are received from abroad. When did it all start? Long before the special military operation 2015, 2017, 2018, 2019, in Daily Mail, NBC, Associated Press, El Confidencial, and other media outlets published articles about it. Doesn't the Global Mail read it? Well, it's time to do so after such shameful publications. Western media were shocked by the level of hatred, aggression, militarization of young Ukrainians. And they openly confessed their hatred to Russia. In April, the Zelensky regime announced about the creation of resilience preparedness centers, which were to be opened in all regions of Ukraine in order to train those who would be engaged in subversive activities, and fighters of neo-Nazi formations were to become trainers. I quote Deputy Head of President's Office of Ukraine, Irina Vereshchuk. On the 23rd of May, she wrote, whether the raw peace agreements or not, according to her, Russia remains our enemy for decades to come, if not for centuries to come. While she can guarantee what is to happen in centuries later, according to Vereshchuk, our children should be ready for it. They should know what war is. Global Mail hasn't read it. It's a shame. The Kiev regime has opened militarized neo-Nazi camps in Ukraine. They resemble Hitlerjugend, and the resilience centers is exactly an analogy of the territorial militia Volkssturm. The Volkssturm was established in the final years of fascist Germany in order to involve the civil population to hostilities, but we shouldn't forget how they ended. Then, 80 years ago, the Führer committed suicide as he was afraid of punishment, and those Nazi leaders who were alive faced the Nuremberg tribunal. Yes, many of them, and Canada knows that full male were welcomed in some Western countries. The Zelensky junta is ready to sacrifice the future of Ukraine, the children and the young people, for the benefit of the neo-Nazi regime, but no British, no Canadian, no French or German media outlets are likely to write about it, although we see that even in those countries there is a growing number of those who want to see the truth. Why don't they write about it? These countries sponsor the Kiev regime. They don't want to see the truth. They have to escalate the crisis. They have to bring the confrontation to a new level. There is no place for truth. And they are absolutely not worried that the lives and the future of children and young people are at stake. Now let's talk about the IAEA activities and the situation around the Zaporozhye NPP. From the 1st September 2022, members of IAEA Secretariat visit the NPP upon invitation of our country. They see regular shellings on the part of the Ukrainian armed forces of the NPP and its city satellite Energodar. The goal was to force the Kiev regime to show greater restraint towards the NPP and its personnel. IAEA experts communicate with the heads and staff on the Zaporozhye NPP and supervise and monitor the radiation levels and participate in the control events in the station. Given the regular attempts to present the experts at the NPP as a mission allegedly sent upon the request of Ukraine, we stressed that we are talking about the presence of a group of experts of the IAEA Secretariat who visit the NPP based on the arrangement between Russia and the IAEA leadership. In 2022-2024, rotation happened at the line of the contact line. However, there were lots of provocations, so we decided that rotation will happen through the territory of the Russian Federation. It was a sign that we are ready to provide the safety of IAEA experts, despite everything that is done by Ukraine. Members of the IAEA Secretariat have the possibility to observe the provocations committed by the Kiev regime. In particular, on the 5th of June, there was a series of attacks by Ukrainian armed forces against the training center with the use of drones. Under the pressure of Western countries, the IAEA leadership doesn't dare to say that Ukraine is to blame for threatening the nuclear safety and security of the NPP, although the IAEA Director General Rafael Gross witnessed attacks on the part of the Ukrainian armed forces. From our part, we regularly inform the IAEA member states about the provocations by the Kiev regime about against the Russian Zaporozhye NPP. We also distribute and disseminate the information circular letters. During the press conference on the 27th of May, Special Representative of the UN Secretary General Stefan Dujarric voiced a statement which is incompatible with his status of a high-level or high-ranking Secretariat's official. Antonio Guterres condemns, according to him, the large-scale Russian attacks against Ukraine on the 24th and 25th of May, but according to Dujarric, Mr. Guterres is only concerned by the attacks of Ukrainian drones against the Russian territory. According to him, the Secretary General ignored the fact that Russia only hit the military facilities of Ukraine, whereas Ukraine deliberately attacked the civilian population of our country. Russian strikes were presented as an established fact, and attacks by Ukrainian drones were presented as reported attacks. But it's a shame a representative of the UN shouldn't make such statements. We consider such statement by Antonio Guterres, as it was attributed to Antonio Guterres, as a sign of the bias and double standards in the UN leadership. Secretary General and his team members keep silent about the glaring violations of international civil humanitarian law by the Kiev regime, or in the best case, they would call both parties for constraint, and they do so in situations when all facts, All evidence points to the responsibility of the Ukrainian armed forces.
Человека.
There is no compassion, there is no mention of human rights, there is no remembering the suffering of many people. We have repeatedly called Antonio Guterres and other senior UN officials to condemn the terror attack against the Kursk region in 2024 and other documented notorious crimes of the Kiev regime. For example, representatives of the Secretariat have avoided these substantial comments and called for restraint and independent investigations. Yes, that might be the case, but everyone should be called upon to exercise restraint. Some elusive wordings are to be found, and to underline that there is no data on the basis of which specific conclusions can be made, but it's only one side way. During the press conference on the 3rd of June, Stefan Dujarric mentioned the explosions of breaches in the Bryansk and Kursk region. When a Russian journalist asked whether Antonio Guterres would like to condemn these atrocities, he said about mourning about all the civilian victims that were caused by the Ukrainian conflict, but it should apply to all the sides. And the UN Secretariat's officials just repeat the insinuations of the Western capitals to discredit our country. They do not cite reliable sources of information and do not check the facts. Antonio Guterres just flagrantly violates the ethical norms of an international officials and the UN Charter, in which there are requirements to adhere to an equal line, equal policy. And the UN is not to act as an honest broker in this case, in the Ukrainian crisis. And Antonio Guterres, we hope that he will avoid those Western political adventurers and occupy a neutral position on the Ukrainian issue and do not allow such ill-considered and non-objective statements. We have supported his fight with pandemics, and he should not become a sponsor of infodemics. Now some words about this aggressive mentality. In the geopolitical dimension, international geopolitical dimension, the NATO countries have drawn attention to American plans to create yet another project of Pentagon, element of Richardson military base, where pilots, NATO and American pilots will be trained against a nearly equal adversary under the name of which they consider Russia and as well as growing challenges on behalf of China. And Alaska is presented as an important bridgehead for defense in the Arctic. It's not surprising, because under far-fetched pretext, the United States and NATO continue to recklessly pursue a course of active militarization of the polar region, expanding their military potential in the region, often of an offensive nature. Such steps are not conducive to strengthening trust in the Arctic and undermine confidence. The Arctic region has been long considered as a territory of dialogue, and the Russian Federation has never threatened anyone in this region, and we will further take all the necessary measures to protect our legal interests, national interests in the high latitude, and guarantee the security of our country at the northern borders. Now some aggressive actions, extremely aggressive statements by NATO Secretary General Rutte on the platform of the London Chatham House Institute of International Relations. He spoke about a better NATO. So what should a better version of NATO be? You would think more effective or working for the benefit of the people who comprise this alliance? Or maybe having specific purposes for building, constructing peace or maintaining peace, but no. As Mark Rutte, NATO Secretary General, mentioned, NATO should become stronger and more lethal. It's just some evil words. NATO should make a quantum leap in its development. What do you think? Again, because of Russia, according to Rutte, because allegedly danger from our country will not disappear even when the war in Ukraine ends. Why is that done? It's understandable to intimidate the citizens of NATO bloc. It's just some far-fetched formula wording of NATO strategists that Russia allegedly could be ready to use military force against NATO within 5 years. But that's just statements. If we have a look at the real situation, Russia is actually now using the military force against NATO by defending against NATO threats, terrorist attacks by the Kiev regime. That's what the NATO Secretary General should have mentioned during all those conferences, how they have turned their political puppets in Ukraine into terrorists and extremists, how they have unleashed a hybrid war against our country and actually are a threat to security of the global majority. But now their rhetoric is different. In order to avoid the developments invented by them, Brussels thinks that they should significantly grow the military potential of a military and industrial complex. Anti-missile defense increase is planned at 400%. Otherwise, as the Secretary General of the alliance mentioned, they would have to learn Russian. Here I can agree, because they should start now, but the motivation should be different. Why are they so afraid to study the Russian language? I do not understand. If they had learned this Russian language earlier, they wouldn't have committed all those silly actions. They would not have such ideas to abandon us with all our culture, our economy. There would be just no attempts to play their stupid games. They would have just other thoughts. Just they're starting to realize that they should study the Russian language. And they can do that. He's talking about NATO becoming stronger and more lethal, but just repeating that it's a defense alliance. Where has NATO defended? Just give me one example during the last decades. Now this bloc is getting ready for a war and just pointing at their future adversary. Now they have invented that lie and growing their military potential. So there should be no doubts among the citizens that that is not the case. This bloc is aggressive, and it is still trying, according to its Secretary General, to become more lethal. Now, about the horrors of Russophobia. The Finnish parliament has adopted a law on a ban to purchase real estate by citizens who allegedly present a threat to the national security of Finland. It's just a good slogan for real estate agencies in Finland. I think it's about the US citizens. I hope so. About NATO bloc representatives, about the citizens living in NATO countries. When they say that those countries and countries who violate the sovereign integrity of other countries. Now maybe in Finnish parliament they would repeat the history of bombing Belgrade. Who has committed that? And citizens registered in such states according to those wordings of this law. It's just understandable who they mean, or the citizens of which country that have been recognized as a threat to Finland. It has initially been conceived as something, another Russophobic act. And now everything has become completely clear because Belarusian citizens are also concerned here by those restrictions. Just I beg your pardon, in the last decades, who has Belarus attacked? I would just like to know the list of the victims. I'm just not aware whether the Finnish parliament knows the geographical location of those countries. Because maybe if the Finnish government makes decisions on the basis of this draft law, they could be just interested in the geographical location of a country. Because it's just citation. Minsk has an interest of supporting Russia, and although it does not have its own desire to undermine the national security of Finland. So who will just decide to purchase real estate in Finland? Who does the Finnish parliament harm? Primarily its own country. It's just Russophobic fears, attempts just to build walls between our countries by all means. And regarding human rights, violation of human rights by Helsinki, like closing the border with Russia and segregation on a national basis. How did that happen? If a person is from Russia or from Belarus, his human rights can be violated. The Finnish people have hardly separated from the horror that hardly avoided the horror that would have happened if Finland would have turned into a Nazi state. We all know about those horrors on the examples of the history of Western Europe. It was just one step from that. Has anyone remained in Helsinki who still remembers that? But against the background of those trends, there are other trends that are becoming more and more obvious. There is a preservation of national sovereignty and respect for the will of their own people. The example of the Slovak Republic. A considerable part of the Slovak society has disagreed with the anti-Russian sanctions imposed by the European Union. It has been around 400,000, nearly 500,000 signatures of Slovak citizens for a referendum to abandon restrictive measures against the Russian Federation because they are detrimental to the country's economy, businesses, and the welfare of the population. According to the number of population of Slovakia, it's a large-scale support of this initiative, and Slovak parliament members have adopted a resolution that allows to occupy a stance against the new anti-Russian sanctions at the level of the EU. That would allow to protect national interests and ensure the welfare of its citizens. Yes, the democracy is declared within the EU, so let them listen to their own people, because the majority of their own people does not even have the right to vote, because when they are trying to express their opinion, they are being told that all that is inappropriate. The EU policy under the pressure of specific NATO states is detrimental to the EU countries, because the direct losses of the European businesses have grown and have exceeded 1.3 billion euros. Against the background of legitimate political discussion, the European Commission continues its confrontational policy. You will not believe it, the 18th package of sanctions against our country has been announced. Where is the depth of the democratic procedures? On the basis of what are those sanctions, those measures prepared? Is it required by the peoples? Who has required that? Which countries? Which peoples? Of course, it's an ideological position. And they're unable to hear the voice of the European peoples. It testifies of the lack of democracy within the EU itself. Of course, sooner or later, the pragmatic approach will prevail in the EU countries, and the abandonment of sanctions will facilitate the beginning of the discussion on the European continent, and will be in favor of security. Now about the World Coordinating Council of Russian Compatriots meeting in the Victory Museum. It's the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War, and issues of falsification of history and preserving the historical memory. I would remind you it will be held in Moscow on the 29th, 30th of October 2025. Attention will be paid to educating young people, promoting the Russian culture, and the conferences of compatriots living in the countries of Asia, Europe, and North America. And there will be also the work of thematic commission and the flower-laying ceremony in the Hall of Memory and Sorrow at the Victory Museum. But actually, our compatriots, they just face immense pressure now. The Foundation for the Support and Protection of the Rights of Compatriots Living Abroad has fallen victim to such persecution. This mechanism has been established by Russian Foreign Ministry, and it's about assistance to our compatriots. Law and humanitarian assistance in difficult living conditions. Now, on the website of the foundation, a detailed statement has been published. There will be a link to that statement in the Today Briefing text version. For the third year in a row, the foundation, it just worries a lot inveterate Russophobes. This organization just helps people without taking into account their ethnicity, their nationality, protecting their legal rights. It's a human rights organization, but it's just a large-scale provocation to distort this noble mission. It's defamation. And the time has been chosen for that by the government of some European countries, the Nazi regime-supporting countries. They're finding ways, looking for ways to harm our country. Now they are attacking our competitors, the assistance that our competitors get, sometimes in just very difficult situations. In many cases, because of the harassment and persecution in Western European countries.
Now they got millions of those who, despite pressure, support the policy of the Russian Federation. They want to threaten those people and punish them, to influence them. That's how Russophobia looks like. The aim of this campaign is clear: to compromise the foundation, to push it out of Europe, to threaten its partners, and what's more important, to make or even to force compatriots to refuse their ties with the motherland. I'll reiterate, the foundation does not cooperate and has never cooperated with special services. No representatives of special services working among this foundation. Other words and statements are lies and provocations. Majority of allegations are reduced to banal ideas about cooperation with Russian special services for the interests of operations of influence on the territories of the EU countries. The basis for the so-called investigations is the information received after the email of the foundation was hacked. They did it on purpose. That's how a civilized world looks like. You have been looking for hackers. Now find them in among your own ranks. The main purpose of the foundation, tried it in its establishing documents, is to facilitate compatriots living abroad, to ensure their rights and legitimate interests. Our efforts aimed to create necessary conditions for discriminatory living of compatriots in the countries they live in, because they seriously contribute to economic, cultural, social prosperity of those countries. Will continue be guided by the principles of international law and to provide all the necessary legal help to compatriots. We received a lot of questions about the situation between Iran and Israel. We see more frequent reports in the media about more tension between these countries, including speculations about possible attacks on the nuclear facilities of Iran. It doesn't take a military expert to understand that such adventures are fraught with long-lasting humanitarian and radiological consequences for the region. In 2024, amid continued escalation in the Gaza Strip, confrontation between Iran and Israel already escalated. Back then, Tehran and West Jerusalem launched a number of mutual missile strikes, but the region managed to avoid a big war. However, now we're sure military means won't help settle the existing differences. We call on both sides to abstain from the steps leading to further violence and spiraling of the situation out of control. We expect results from indirect dialogue between Iran and the US. As far as we know, the next round of the consultations may take place in the nearest future. We believe that only diplomacy may give mutually acceptable solutions based on international law and coordinated balance of interest. On June 15th, the ASEAN Center under MGIMO University celebrates its 15th anniversary. This center has become one of the key tools to promote the cooperation between the association and its countries with Russia in various spheres. In 2023, it launched a 2-year master's degree at MGIMO University of specialists from Russia and 10 countries of ASEAN. The center helps expand channels of interaction with partners, including through the network of scientific and research centers ASEAN-Russia, the second track of ASEAN Regional Forum on Security, and Asia-Pacific Council of Cooperation and Security. Its effective work is recognized in many countries of the region. We would like to congratulate the leadership and the employees of the center and wish them success and all new initiatives. All of this is very important given the global turbulence. On June 11th, 12th, these days, Kazan hosts the Third International Forum of Education Ministers Shaping the Future. This event is organized by the Minister of Education of the Russian Federation together with the Cabinet of Ministers of the Republic of Tatarstan. The aim of the forum is to coordinate efforts in education that is one of the most relevant for international humanitarian cooperation. This work is in demand. This is clear from the fact that some 112 high foreign guests from 43 countries came there. A video address by President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, was sent there. He underlined that a free, equal access to knowledge, technologies, and scientific achievement is the basis for sustainable development, just and secure multipolar world. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in his video address stressed that the goal of Russia is to develop mutually respectful partnership in education based on cultural and civilization and diversity in the world. The delegates will exchange experiences and discuss issues of strengthening national educational systems. We sure that the dialogue within the forum will be extensive and the recommendations worked out during it will be implemented practically for the good of the citizens of our countries. And as the last topic of our first part of the briefing, I would like to mention the holiday that we celebrate tomorrow. On June 12th, we celebrate the Day of Russia, and our leadership will say a lot about it, as well as ordinary people. This day will see a lot of events, people's events, sporting events, concert, exhibitions. Major countries will host big celebrations. Smaller towns will host very cozy celebrations. This, all the places in Russia will do something reflecting its uniqueness. The new entities of the Russian Federation also will celebrate this holiday. The Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, Zaporozhye and Kherson regions. With a special feeling, our soldiers the heroes of the special military operation will celebrate this date. As usual, the celebrations will take place abroad, at Russia's diplomatic missions, at the platforms of the UN and other international organizations. And of course, we'll be joined by our true friends, Russia's friends, who sincerely share our commitment to a more just, polycentric world order, free of dictatorship and new colonial practices. With a feeling of pride and joy, we celebrate Day of Russia, a holiday of sovereign, independent state with great past moving forward. The state with huge economic, scientific, intellectual capabilities. We will preserve the ties between generations and values, and we will overcome all the tests and challenges we face. I congratulate you. Happy Day of Russia. We have decrees of our president about moral and traditional values. There's a lot of literature, films about our country, what it means. But every time, I suggest everybody to listen to our hymn and see how it describes Russia and our people. I am prepared to take your questions. This is International Affairs with us. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Congratulations on the upcoming holiday, you too. We have the following question. On June 4th, during an interview to Financial Times, Prime Minister of Moldova said that Russia ostensibly is interested in the victory of the Moldovan opposition in the upcoming parliamentary elections in Moldova because it will give the possibility to Russia to deploy Russian contingents in Dniester region. How can you comment on that? You mentioned deployment of 10,000 Russian soldiers, but I would like to ask the Prime Minister of Moldova about the sources of this information. But he must base his ideas on something. Probably he was hacked, and that's why he says all this bollocks. But probably he was influenced by his conversations with officials and parliamentarists in the US. Probably it was them who told this to him. He went to Brussels recently. Probably he was shown or told something there, so he should share this with us. Let's look at the facts. The number of Russian soldiers on the left side of Dniester is 1,200 people. Their presence in the region depend on the settlement of the Dniester conflict. Russian soldiers is the only real factor that guarantee peace in the Dniester region. I would like to say that there's no necessity to bring more soldiers there. The threat to this region comes from another place. I mean the Kiev's plans to enter this region. As to this, probably this regime serve the Kiev's regime interests. I don't know. it's them who came up with the idea that there's no Moldovan language. Probably they are prepared to give away part of their own country as to the situation in the Dniester settlement, but there has been no positive developments. That direct dialogue between Chisinau and Tiraspol cannot substitute negotiations in the multilateral format. Amid this, there has been a huge pause in the work of multilateral negotiation format 5+2, where Russia participates. We think that this is the only platform that can contribute to finding solutions to relevant issues of the Dniester settlement. We're told that Russia or Ukraine cannot be seated at the same table. But Istanbul can do that. But the meetings of the United Control Commission, it is not possible. It is quite strange why we cannot hold this kind of meeting. But why cannot we do with this format as well? These are very precise questions. We shouldn't make anything up. We should just ask these questions to those people who make such statements from Chisinau. Russia's position remains unchanged. Our mission is to maintain peace and predictability in the Dniester region and favor normalization of the dialogue between Chisinau and Tiraspol. But we would like to learn the sources that Prime Minister of Moldova used, who told this false information to him, to follow up on this topic. The authorities of Moldova continue to implement measures aimed at suspending Russia-Moldova intergovernmental agreement about cultural centers. How can you comment on this? The actions of the Moldovan authorities to denounce the 1998 agreement is a part of anti-Russian campaign of the Sandu regime. This is accompanied by allegations against our countries about some kind of interference into internal affairs of Moldova. Now the Russian House is declared to be a source of, can you even imagine that, of disinformation? It was alleged in spreading propaganda and undermining work. It's absurd. The Russian Center implements projects in humanitarian, educational sphere. But why does this Russian House bother the Moldovan authorities so much? As the parliamentary elections come closer, the Chisinau decided to act according to the scheme they already know. They want to have an argument in their favor to distract people from the terrible situation that Sandu created for their people. On June the 4th, MFA of Moldova declared that during the upcoming elections, Moldovans only in the US, Canada, Scandinavian countries, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand will be able to vote. Russia's diaspora won't be able to vote, and that's what the authorities do to be able to rig these elections. This contradicts democratic procedures. Not to let citizens who have the right to vote.
Technically, it is possible. So it's not about technical impossibility. It's about the unwillingness to give the voting right to a segment of its own society for expressing their will. So what sort of democracy we are talking about? Official Chisinau, according to the Moldovan opposition, will do everything possible to minimize the number of polling stations in Russia. During the presidential election in 2024 in Moldova, only 2 poll stations were opened in the embassy of Moscow. As a result, thousands of Moldovan citizens in Russia were deprived of their voting right. Censorship is growing in Moldova. The authorities of the Council for Broad TV and Radio Broadcasting is growing. There is a draft law with amendments to the code about audiovisual media services, which envisages high fines for disinformation, which is likely to affect national security, democratic and political processes. In other words, there will be fines for the content that authorities don't want to see. That's what I'm talking about. But the agencies who spread disinformation by the Prime Minister of Moldova will not be fined. They will never be fined. But why not? In a sense, it is another instrument to use influence measures against unfavored bloggers, journalists, politicians, and candidates. The social-economic situation in the Republic is deteriorating. According to independent experts, over 80% of citizens of the country cannot afford healthy nutrition. 25% of people are suffering under malnutrition. It is a result of decline of agricultural production, and its experts in 2024 it was reduced by 12.2%, and exports to EU countries was reduced by 10%. The state debt reached a level of $7 billion, 1/3 of the budget is financed from Western grants and loans. Moldovans don't believe in the accusations against Russia in the Russian House. How is the Russian House connected to what's happening in the economy? According to Moldovan authorities, local citizens are concerned about the closing of the Russian House, and a group of representatives of the Russian community in Moldova and the Coordination Council of Russian compatriots living in Moldova said they were ready to defend the Russian House. Moldovan citizens are oppressed by those who justify their actions as service to the Moldovan people. Thank you so much. Is Ria Novosti with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have 2 questions today, if I may. My first question is this. It's about the authorities of Germany. These authorities continue to exercise pressure against Russian media representatives. Representative of Russia Segodnya, Mr. Feoktistov, was declined his right to exercise his work, and he was prescribed to leave the country no later than on the 19th of August. On the 6th of June, he could not enter Germany, and later local police visited his family who stayed in the country, and passports of his spouse and daughter were confiscated. How could you comment on this? Well, first, we've already commented on this, but since you asked this question, I'll do it once again. The German authorities now pursue the policy of squeezing out of any media presence of Russia in its media space. There are too many occasions for such comments from our part come from Germany. They use different methods. Sometimes they block broadcasting possibilities, or they use force measures against Russian journalists, or they oppress Russian journalists. But what happened in this case is beyond not only journalism ethics, but general moral standards. This time, under pressure were family members of the journalist, his spouse and his daughter, so they were basically enslaved. That's exactly what happens to slaves. They cannot see their husband and father, although 2 months remain until his travel to Russia. Even a minor, a 7-year-old daughter, is treated as an outright criminal who is under house arrest. That's what it is. It is pressure. It is a way to influence the journalist and his family. But what happened? What's the reason? There should be a reason. It should be made public. While it was done for a simply reason that they stayed in the country as family members of an unfavorable journalist. The German authorities have to explain themselves why they persecute this Russian journalist and his family. But my next step will be an attempt to label them in order to designate them and segregate them from other citizens of Germany. They might use specific bright colors. Germany has such experience from the future. We know it all full well. Moral guidances and democratic traditions are degrading in the country. Bandits act like this, not authorities of a country which considers itself as a civilized country. We see an attempt to harass the journalist and his family and send a clear message to other journalists who might have their own point of view or would dare say what they think. It is an attempt to send a message about what's going to happen to them. It is an alarming trend, and in the context of an economic failure of Germany, such methods of influencing people, such methods have already been seen in the past. Such a primordial Russophobia and political censorship is what we will necessarily respond to. But relevant international bodies, such as Director General of UNESCO, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and OSCE Representative for Human Rights for the freedom of media should respond. Settling scores for journalists by means of pressure on the family members. What happens next? They have to explain themselves, to give their assessments. I would like to emphasize the context. German media, just look at the difference between how German journalists in Russia are treated and Russian journalists in Germany. Just ask the German journalists in Russia, be it on the camera, on the record, or in a personal conversation. Well, as a matter of fact, the German journalists cannot open their mouth. They cannot say a word because they have to travel back to Germany with its liberal dictatorship. So this harassment against Russian Germany is what we see with regards to Russian correspondents. Many Russian journalists don't receive visas or accreditations. We'll give our reactions. We are working on the response, and it will follow soon. Thank you so much. And my second question, if I may. U.S. President Donald Trump expressed his interest in Russian side being a facilitator in the negotiating process between Washington and Tehran. Is Russia ready to make its contribution? Well, it wasn't for a minute that the Russian side weakened its efforts to contribute to political diplomatic settlement around the Iranian nuclear program. There are cautious signs that the situation will not reach a dangerous level. We hope Washington understands the inadmissibility of military strikes against nuclear and energy infrastructure of Iran, and we hope they have made a deliberate choice in favor of diplomacy. Russia has repeatedly called to use diplomatic steps without any hints to other options. Obviously, hard work is ahead, which will require political will and resilience. We remain in close contact with Iranian partners on the topic. The U.S. has a clear idea of our approach. If Tehran and Washington are interested in seeing Russia as a facilitator in working out a negotiating solution which makes it possible to eliminate any suspicions, we are ready to do so. Back in the day, as you know, our country made a contribution to forming a balance of interests on which the JCPOA was based. Today, it looks like the end result of indirect Iranian-US dialogue largely depends on how much the parties are interested in approximating their positions while taking into account their mutual requirements. The legitimate right of Iran to develop the peace nuclear program is something which is quite clear. It is laid down in the NPT treaty. We see that Tehran is committed to continuing negotiations with its American counterparts regarding the modalities of potential agreement. And if there is a constructive and positive dynamics in future contacts, we hope that the high confrontation level will decrease and the negotiating outcomes will be translated into practical progress, which we would only welcome. And as a bottom line, I may say that from our part, we are intending and willing to contribute to this process in the interest of strengthening the international peace and security. Thank you. Is Russia today with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. My name is Natalia. In one of the recent publications, El País writes about residential areas which the Ukrainian armed forces re-equipped for plans for drone construction. They are in the front line. It follows from the article that there is no way to understand what's happening inside these residential houses, but their number is growing day by day. What do you think? How much more proofs are needed to clearly show that the Ukrainian armed forces use civilian infrastructure? How much more evidence would it take for Western backers to exercise pressure on Ukraine? How can these Ukraine tactics used by Ukrainian armed forces influence the Russian negotiating position? Well, we repeatedly stressed that Kiev uses the human shield tactics. They not only use the civilian infrastructure. Kiev regime fighters hide in these residential infrastructure areas, and then they speak about Russian strikes against Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. But you cannot reduce it to the facilities themselves. we should not forget about the people. They don't hide themselves in the houses in which people no longer live. They don't hide arms in empty squares or facilities. They do it exactly in the residential areas where people are medically treated, where children receive education. So they use the human shield tactics. I'll remind you, Amnesty International, which can hardly be considered as a pro-Russian body, wrote that civilian infrastructure is used for deployment of munitions. The Ukrainian army, according to Amnesty International, makes strongholds in residential areas. It is not the only publication, it's not the only article, but it demonstrates the difference in covering the Ukrainian crisis. A short time ago, despite the facts provided by our country, the West closed its eyes to the methods used by Ukrainian armed forces. I'll remind you that the use of people as human shield is a gross violation of international humanitarian law. There is no other way to classify a production of drones in residential houses. If there are increasingly more publications about this, the greater will be the public outcry, I believe. But how much more efforts, how much more publications it will take, I can hardly say. One should simply go on, and then I hope it will be considered as a generally recognized reality, as a commonly recognized fact, which is needed for the Western society to wake up. I'm talking about those who still have some suspicions or doubts. We provide such facts too. We provide evidence which serves as evidence for those journalists who use facts. Our approach to settling the Ukrainian crisis remains unchanged. Russia is seriously willing to continue the negotiating process in order to reach an ultimate settlement of the conflict. Both these modalities were explained and presented by the Russian leadership. So please, if you quote me, present these facts and this attitude as a part of the Russian negotiating approach, which was formulated by the Russian leadership. Is the Media Corporation of China with us? Yes, Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. We are here with us. On the 10th of June, the International Day of Dialogue Between Civilizations was celebrated for the first time. This initiative was put forward by China and unanimously adopted at the UN General Assembly last year. Secretary General stressed that dialogue is a way for peace, and diversity of civilization is more relevant as ever before. In the current context, how would you assess the role of the dialogue? Well, we appreciate it. We believe the dialogue is very important, both between the established bodies and between the people. You may call it public diplomacy, when people unite themselves on their own and hold events in order to prevent self-aggression that we mentioned today. I believe it is very important. It is an important part of the future multipolar world order, where states are no longer passive objects of geopolicy, but to seek to strengthen their national sovereignty, to strengthen their identity, and do so by means of cooperation when they want to uphold their historical and cultural traditions. If you wish, we can send you a more elaborate answer. Later, is Reuter with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We are here with us, and we have two questions, if we may. The first question deals with the topic that you've already touched upon, but let's look at it from a different perspective. Does Russia see risks for a negotiating process around Ukraine in the context of the most recent escalation? I'm talking about strikes against the Russian infrastructure that you've mentioned and statements by the NATO officials. Well, I believe there is a contradiction in your question. Either we talk about risks or escalation. I mean risks for the negotiating process resulting from the escalation. Well, I believe we should speak either about risks or about escalation. If we are talking about escalation, we should not speak about risks, but about a direct threat to the political diplomatic process.
If it's about the escalation of the conflict, it's not about risks, it's about a threat. A threat should be mentioned here. Risks, it just can happen, cannot happen. But now I think you are just exaggerating. So by taking a key role in providing assistance to Zelensky regime, the Western War Party, and they just call themselves that way, they position themselves that way, they just demonstrate the aggressive stance, as you have said correctly, for escalation. Not just some passing between two dangerous things, but it's they just support the prolongation of the conflict, and they do not conceal that. It's weapons supplies, their own militarization, and the outcome of another Ramstein meeting we have discussed today already. Has anyone mentioned peace and negotiations there? Of course not. It's about a threat, a direct threat, not only to negotiations process, but to the peace on the European continent as a whole. They just discuss that maybe on the sidelines, and they allow to understand that peaceful agreements will lead to an end of the Kiev regime. It's not satisfactory for them, and they make direct statements on that. And they are ready to commit anything in order to not to allow such a scenario. Maybe they just do not want to seem lack of desire, maybe just not a lack of desire, but they are afraid to look not as they have tried to present themselves, the masters of the world. Maybe it's connected with something else, but it's a question for political scientists, I think. I would mention a wide-scale threat and not just risks here. Thank you very much. And the second question. Just this night, Alexander Torchiyev, Russian ambassador, said that the US and Russia have agreed to postpone a meeting, and the next meeting will be held in Moscow. It will be held in the very soon. So, could you precise when this meeting will be held? And as soon as we get this date, we will definitely share it with you. And logistics details as well. Thank you very much. Is international reporters with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. It's International Reporters Agency. My question is, in Italy, in Bologna, Yuri Previtali will soon perform an Italian fighting for the Ukrainian army, who has had neo-fascist views in the past. And the Bolognian authorities have closed another center, Villa Paradiso, for allegedly holding pro-Russian events. How would you comment on this fact? It's just horrible. It's a shame. Because the Bolognian authorities to remove the cultural center, Villa Paradiso, under the pretext of screening of a Russian film there. Just a flagrant example of violation of democratic values and democratic freedoms, the freedom of speech enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the European Convention on Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms, and everyone knows, everyone is aware that by closing the access, blocking this access for their own citizens to alternative information that is beyond the mainstream in some cases, is just a tough control instrument. And it's a first step to dictatorship that is also familiar to European residents. European citizens today more and more find themselves in such a digital concentration camp where the freedom of speech is narrowed to the statements adopted not only by their own governments but in the collective Brussels, and conveyed through NATO and EU institutions and European Commission institutions to allegedly sovereign states. It's just not the violation of a basic right, basic for European, the right to know more than the authorities allow them. It's something else, but the Italians and their desire to know the truth is quite strong. They want to know, they come to Russia, they write books, they interview people, they follow the events. They are not afraid of bans by the authorities. They are even not afraid of threats by that mad Banderite activists. Italy has become the first country of the European Union where on the 31st of May this year, RT Doc Festival was held, documentary festival where documentary films were shown, very different films, stories of real people, not invented stories. It's not fantasies, it's real facts. It has become possible because of the bravery and positive attitude of citizens who are not indifferent, and thanks to the activist Vincenzo La Russo, Italian journalist who really supports countering fascism and common goals for the humankind. He has facilitated the screenings of RT films in different towns. It's documentary films. It's not something invented. And those actions have been attacked by the European Parliament, Italian Parliament members and mainstream media. So it's not allowed to show the atrocities of Banderite in Ukraine, in Europe, because it's allegedly a Russian propaganda and strongly influences public opinion. It's the facts, it's the truth. But what is facilitated and promoted are the trips across Italy of an Italian mercenary who participated in hostilities and supported Ukraine. So the cultural center, it has been closed. Is it the first Italian mercenary to be used for this purpose? And who is just not punished there for his crimes? And you can remember also Julia Shivbala, a participant in hostilities supporting Ukraine, who spoke at meetings in Italy and openly admitted killing Russian servicemen. No one paid any attention to that in the Italian government. So it's flagrant, callous demonstration of double standards. It's a political order. It's banning cultural events on false basis. Thank you very much. Is Open TV Greece with us? Yes, Madam Zakharova, if you allow me also 2 questions. Recently, Russian Foreign Ministry has mentioned banning access to a Greek official in response to refusal to prolong the accreditation to RIA Novosti correspondent in Greece. Will you not name him? We have such a rule where we do not name people, we do not make the names public. Yes, there are countries where we name those who are under Russian sanctions. In relation to the EU countries, we do not have such a practice. And one more question. In the Greek media, there have recently been reports of the Romanian supplies of aircraft and accompanying personnel. Greece shipments to Romania. Maybe you have some drone UAV zone creation is coming. What's your assessment of this? Yes, actually, NATO is using those false pretexts, allegedly a Russian threat, to increase its expansion, its aggression. NATO presence is being increased in the east, including the Black Sea region. There are more and more tactical militant groups there. Military infrastructure, more and more equipment is used in order to patrol the Black Sea region. The expansion is obvious and it's tracked by our relevant structures. I would like to underline once again that the military potential of NATO in the region has no basis and leads to further escalation of the military situation. If you have some detailed question, we will just address the relevant experts. Thank you. Thank you very much. Is News.ru with us? Hello, Madam Zakharova. Mikhail Rosen, News.ru, media outlet. We congratulate you on the coming holiday. Likewise, thank you very much. What's your position in relation to another attempt by the Latvian Sejm to ban the communication in the Russian language in public space, public places on the territory of Latvia? It's just a shame. It's uncivilized action. I'm not sure that the current Latvian authorities can be characterized as civilized, but what they're doing for the people of this country is just a real shame. Because Latvia is one of the countries, the EU countries, where Russian speakers are discriminated on a large-scale basis. They are continuing to build a mono-ethnical model of state, ignore all the human rights instruments, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, International Convention on Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination, International Pact on Civil and Political Rights, Convention on Protection of Major Human Rights and Freedoms, and many OSCE obligations in this sphere. Is just blatant Nazism. It's manifested that way. So we just draw attention to those violations on international platform. Riga is hiding under the back of its senior EU patrons, and how this is contrary to all those values so actively protected by Brussels. But it has become inconvenient, actually, because to admit that Riga is just supporting neo-Nazism, it's just to admit that they are facilitating those actions. and it's just a mother tongue for a significant part of the population. So rational fear, how strong should it be? This mythical Russian threat they have invented for themselves, and Brussels has invented it for them, the fear of everything that is Russian, including the culture and the language, to fight those barbaric and modern barbaric methods. So we're not ready to endure all that. We will continue to seek to support those commitments reached at the international level, and we will use all the powers available to us. So another question, the Hungarian Prime Minister says that he will not, the citizens of Hungary are not ready to die for Ukraine and do not turn it into a new Afghanistan. So how can the Russian Foreign Ministry comment these statements by Mr. Orban? So I cannot comment on the first part because we need to have a closer look at this quotation. And the second part, that the Hungarian citizens do not want to die for Ukraine, and no one wants that. So, they're just forcefully mobilizing people. That draft that concerns also school children who are only 18 years old. It's just school children. And Mr. Orban is a tough politician, strongly supporting the Hungarian national interests, and despite that pressure put on him by Brussels, he's known for his well-balanced approach to the situation in Ukraine and the understanding of the root causes of the situation of the conflict as a result of Zelensky being governed totally from abroad. He has on multiple occasions mentioned that by calling upon the EU officials, the EU leaders, to take a responsible stance, to adopt a responsible stance in that situation. Thank you very much. Is Veryuk with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova, hello. We congratulate you on the coming holiday. We have two questions today. The first one recently is in Azerbaijan, according to NATO partnership program. Trainings have been held on theoretical and practical tasks for planning and managing NATO operations. There will be soon another drills by joint drills with Azerbaijan. So, what's your comment with regard to this situation? We have mentioned on numerous occasions that it's not good for the security on the South Caucasus. It's just to unbalance the region, to turn different actors against one another. And we hope that Azerbaijan reasonably assesses the risks of interaction with those military blocs. An aide to Azerbaijan, President Hikmet Gajiyev, has recently noted that in negotiations with Armenia, there have been statements on the lack of necessity in the presence of foreign military forces there, and taken into account and a call upon with the withdrawal of the Russian military base. What would be your comment? Actually, I have not heard such statements from Azerbaijan. If we hear such statements, if we see them, we will comment on them. And regarding the EU mission in Armenia, we are well aware what its staff members do. They're just spies. And they do not facilitate any security in the region and stability. And regarding the Russian military base, these issues are not on the agenda. It's obvious because it's an important security element in the region in Armenia and the entire South Caucasus. And the deployment of the base, as you know, is guided by the relevant bilateral instruments between Armenia and Russia. This issue has never been discussed within the framework of our interaction with Azerbaijan, so please do not invent anything here. In March this year, we have marked a 30-year anniversary of the treaty on the Russian military base on the territory of the Republic of Armenia, so I congratulate you. I congratulate everyone on that. And my last question, Azerbaijan continues to destroy monuments in Nagorno-Karabakh of Soviet monuments to participants in the Second World War. Recently, a monument in the village of Yemichan has been destroyed. So I would like to know your opinion. Have you received a response from Baku why they are destroying monuments to the heroes of the Second World War? So we are working with our Azerbaijani colleagues on that, but I would like to ask you a question. Are you interested in other monuments dismantled in other countries? I have never actually seen any cooperation from you in supporting the in protecting the memory of the Russian soldiers, Soviet soldiers, definitely of their Armenian origins. So we do our best just to lay flowers, to keep their graves. We preserve their memory. So why? In that sense, you do not ask questions not only to us, but also in your country. What are the joint efforts in that regard? So what has happened recently in Ukraine? There were no soldiers of Armenian origin there when the bodies were exhumated, when the monuments were dismantled. I have not heard about your questions, about your desire to talk on that issue. We perfectly understand why and in which context you raise this issue. Please do not do that. It's just becoming blasphemous to ask me those questions, regularly. Please do not do that. When you want to talk about monuments next time, let us arrange an interview and I will tell you everything. I'm a representative of the Armenian media outlet. So the Red Army soldiers who are your compatriots, their remains, monuments with their names are regularly dismantled on the territory of the European Union. Where is your desire to protect those monuments? It's just our country that protects us, protects them with all the possible means. You are just aware of all that, so let us move on, but it's just beyond everything. I repeat, it's not just some acute issue, not some complicated issue. It's just nearing blasphemy. Really, we will arrange a special interview on that. I will cite the fact, I will tell everything, and maybe you will ask this question someone else, maybe someone from your country. Why the monuments dismantled?
Why the monuments to Armenian soldiers being dismantled are not resonated in the public of your country. You don't have anything to give to me. I know this topic profoundly. Let's move on. Is Belarus сегодня with us? Is Belarus сегодня with us? Is Almaydin with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Congratulate you on the upcoming holiday. I'm the citizen of Russia. I congratulate you too. How do you evaluate the information that Israel ostensibly provided Ukraine with air defense system. For the first time, it was commented on by the Foreign Minister of Israel, and it is not true. Why the ambassador of Israel to Kiev can make such statements is a question to them. Yet again, we had explanations of the MFA of Israel and that it was not true. We take into account official statements of the MFA of Israel that armaments that Israel do not want to supply Kiev with armament in future, and we will continue our cooperation in various spheres. Thanks to you and to you. I can see that there are several questions, and I'll answer them individually. If I may, given my schedule, I have to go. I congratulate you on the upcoming holiday and wish you peace, prosperity, and everything best to you and your loved ones. Happy